Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're embarking on what is honestly an epic journey, both geographically and spiritually. We're going to trace one of the most significant, revered, and just flat out complex waterways on the entire planet. I'm talking about the Ganges River system. From its frozen origins way up high in the Himalayas, all the way down to the sprawling, wild mangrove forests of the Bay of Bengal. This river isn't just water, it's a massive, flowing lifeline.
Okay, let's dive right into this because the sheer scale here is kind of hard to wrap your head around. We aren't just talking about a big river. We're talking about an ecosystem that literally sustains over 40% of India's population. Think about that for a second. It drives agriculture, it supports absolute megacities, and it forms the bedrock of some of the most ancient cultural traditions on Earth. So to really understand how one river can pull all of that off, we've got to start at the very beginning.
All right, Section 1, the birth of a river, from icy peaks to the Punch Prayag. Picture this. You're high up in the Garhwal Himalayas of Uttarakhand. The air is super thin, the peaks are incredibly jagged, and the entire landscape is just dominated by ice. The physical origin of the river's main stem begins right here, at a site called Gaumukh. Now, Gaumukh literally translates to cow's mouth, and that's because of the shape of the ice cave right at the terminus of the Gangotri Glacier. This right here is the source of the Bhagirathi River, and for devout Hindus, this remote, icy spot is a deeply, deeply sacred pilgrimage site. People trek through some incredibly harsh, rocky terrain, past places like Chirbasa and Bojwasa, just to bathe in these freezing, pure waters. But here's the thing. The river doesn't just burst out as one massive, unstoppable flow. It's actually a collection of streams that gradually join together. Let's look at how this builds through what's known as the Punch Prayag, or the 5 secret confluences. Basically, as the Alaknanda River moves downhill, it gathers force day by day. It meets the Doli Ganga at Vishnuprayag, then the Nandakini at Nandaprayag. Next, the Pindar River adds to the flow at Karnaprayag, followed by the Mandakini at Rudraprayag. Finally, at Devprayag, the Alaknanda officially merges with the Bhagirathi, and it is only after this massive compounding mixing of water that the river finally gets its official name, the Ganga. However, the very source of this magnificent river is facing a serious threat. The Gangotri Glacier is one of the biggest in the Himalayas. It spans about 30 kilometers in length and holds roughly 20 cubic kilometers of ice, which is just a staggering amount of frozen water. But despite that massive scale, it is incredibly vulnerable. 34. That is a number you really need to know. It's the number of meters per year that the Gangotri Glacier has been receding over the last 25 years. Now, it has technically been retreating since we first started measuring it way back in 1780, but the pace has accelerated alarmingly in the 21st century. And this rapid melting directly threatens the long-term water system that literally billions of people rely on. Let's move down the mountain to Section 2. Lifeline of the Plains, supporting 57 million lives. So as the river crashes out of those steep, fish-shaped Himalayan valleys, its velocity suddenly drops, and it spills out into the flat, vast expanses of the Indo-Gangetic Plains. Because the ground levels out, the river stops cutting downward into the earth and instead begins to widen out, meandering and dropping massive, massive amounts of nutrient-rich alluvial sediment. This sediment is exactly what creates the immensely fertile agricultural lands of the Ganges Basin. And this basin spans an astonishing 8.6 lakh square kilometers. It's huge. And because this land is so incredibly fertile, it has naturally given rise to some of the most densely populated and historically important cities in the world. You've got Haridwar, which is famous for those massive Kumbh Mela gatherings. There's Kanpur, a booming industrial hub, Prayagraj and Varanasi, essentially these spiritual capitals of the country, down to Patna with its vibrant Chhat Puja rituals, all the way to Kolkata, which completely relies on the Hooghly distributary. For these cities, the river isn't just some pretty backdrop. It is the absolute beating heart of their existence.
Which brings us to Section 3, the mighty Yamuna tributary, the longest branch.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that we can't fully understand the Ganges without talking about its longest, most critical tributary, the Yamuna, which, by the way, is also venerated as a living goddess. This brings us to the Triveni Sangam. This is a highly sacred spot in Prayagraj where the Yamuna finally merges with the Ganges, alongside the invisible, mythical Saraswati River. Pilgrims literally travel by boats out to platforms erected midstream just to offer prayers here, making it one of the absolute holiest geographic coordinates in all of India. But before it even reaches the Ganges, the Yamuna does a ton of heavy lifting on its own. It collects massive amounts of water from the peninsular plateau through its own network of tributaries, rivers like the Chambal, the Sindh, the Betwa, and the Ken. They traverse hundreds of kilometers just to feed into the Yamuna, turning its set basin into an absolute powerhouse of water resources.
Over its 1,376-kilometer journey, the Yamuna alone sustains 57 million people. To really put that into perspective for you, it supplies over 70% of the water for the entire sprawling metropolis of Delhi. Millions and millions of lives are completely daily dependent on the flow of this one single tributary.
This leads us right into Section 4, the pollution paradox, sacred waters versus modern waste. This immense human reliance brings us to what is easily the most dramatic and difficult part of our explainer, a devastating pollution paradox. So on one hand, you have this deeply held spiritual belief. The river is a pure goddess. Bathing in her waters is believed to cleanse the mind and soul of sin. But on the other hand, the physical, on-the-ground reality is starkly different. Today, the river system receives around 800 million liters of largely untreated sewage and industrial effluent every single day. And this brilliantly illustrates just how concentrated the problem is. Look at the Yamuna as it passes through Delhi. The river itself is over 1,300 kilometers long, right? Yet, a tiny 22-kilometer stretch just from the Wazirabad Barrage to the Okhla Barrage accounts for nearly 80% of the total pollution in the entire river. It is an incredibly localized, super dense bottleneck of toxic waste. So why is this happening? Well, it really comes down to basic infrastructure failing to keep pace with just explosive urban growth. Reports show that 22 out of 35 sewage treatment plants in Delhi do not meet prescribed wastewater standards. The result of that? You get hazardous foam literally floating on the surface of the water, creating a severe health risk for the very people who still step into the river for their daily religious rituals. Moving downstream, we arrive at Section 5, into the Sundarbans Delta, the world's largest delta. Leaving the dense, polluted urban centers behind, the river continues its journey eastward, eventually spilling over into Bangladesh, where it merges with the Brahmaputra and starts to fan out as it meets the Bay of Bengal. This right here is the Sundarbans, the world's largest delta. Because the river's velocity drops to almost zero at this point, it deposits the very last of its silt, creating this vast, sprawling network of islands and waterways. It's a rich, brackish, tidal environment that has even been recognized globally as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And the ecosystem here? It is wildly unique. This is the domain of the ultimate apex predator, the Royal Bengal tiger, alongside massive saltwater crocodiles that can weigh up to 1,000 kilograms. No joke. The plant life is equally fascinating. Almost 70% of the forest is covered in sundari trees, which is actually where the region gets its name. But honestly, my absolute favorite detail here is the Gewa tree. It's locally known as the blinding tree because it oozes this toxic milky white sap from its bark that can literally cause temporary blindness. It is just a perfectly wild, fiercely resilient landscape. When you take a step back and look at the whole picture, the Ganges River system is an absolute masterclass in interconnectedness. From a single icy drop melting off the Gangotri Glacier, carving its way through jagged mountains, sustaining those vast agricultural plains, surviving the intense industrial pollution of the cities, and finally breathing life into a sprawling mangrove forest, the river is constantly in motion. It's constantly alive. Which brings us to our final stop, Section 6, a living entity, the future of the river. That idea that the river is alive has actually taken on a very literal legal meaning recently. So the crucial point is this completely unprecedented legal shift. Recognizing the vital importance of the river and the severe threats it faces, the Uttarakhand High Court granted the river Ganga and its main tributary, the Yamuna, the status of a legal and living entity. What this means is the river now holds the same corresponding rights, duties, and liabilities as a human person. So legally speaking, polluting the river is now legally equivalent to harming a human being. It is a truly fascinating philosophical and legal framework designed to try and force a massive cleanup effort. But it does leave us with a really profound question to ponder as we wrap up today. If we grant human rights to a river, is that legal shield actually enough to save it from our own massive human impact? Or will rapid urbanization and glacial retreats outpace our ability to protect it? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep exploring.